Hey guys, Ron here, and I like Charizard. I mean, it's actually my least favorite of the 3 fully evolved Kanto starters, but it's still a 9 out of 10 for me. True story, I have a Venusaur and fairly handsome Blastoise on my desk, so I can look at him every day, yet Charizard is over here. Granted, near one of my favorite Pokemon ever, but it's still not one of my absolute favorites. But there are a lot of Pokemon fans who really hate Charizard, way worse than I did. It's a fact that a majority of fans do have positive opinions on this flying fire friend, because there are multiple reasons that this Pokemon is incredibly popular among old and new fans, but we'll talk about the love later on in this video. But right now we're going to focus on the hate. The reason is, I actually never fully understood it until I set out to get into the minds of Charizard haters. Even though they are a minority, if only 1% of fans hate Charizard, that means at least 200,000 people despise this pocket monster. That's a lot. That's like the entire town of Salt Lake City, Utah hating on one fiery boy. The people there must be pretty salty. And that's kind of what I thought most Charizard haters were. Just salty about the fact that Charizard gets a lot of attention. But it's more complicated than that. So sit back as I go through all the valid and, in my opinion, non-valid reasons Pokemon fans hate Charizard. The most basic reason Charizard was destined to be hated was the fact that it's a starter Pokemon. Before even talking about the obvious reasons, like Charizard's overexposure in media, we have to address the core reason this Pokemon is both loved and hated. Fans, especially as children, get really defensive about their partner, the Pokemon they chose in the beginning of their journey. Kids who chose Squirtle and ended up with Blastoise tend to defend their reasons for choosing their water starter, but not by backing up their choice, but by bashing the other choices. That was a good chance to make a skull bash pun. This polarizing attitude that I definitely advocate against makes people hate whatever isn't on their side. Some people just have the mindset that if I have a Venusaur, that means Blastoise and Charizard suck, and vice versa. Keep in mind that this naturally happens in every generation. Kids who chose Typhlosion will criticize Feraligatr and Meganium, and when one of the 3 starters becomes more popular and gets more attention, it just fuels the hatred, since your favorite starter may get less attention as a result. And remember, a lot of people's favorite Pokemon are starter Pokemon. In Hoenn, it always seemed like Blaziken was getting more attention than Sceptile and Swampert. Some people hated this and began antagonizing Blaziken, but I, a fan of the Sceptile, never hated Blaziken for being the fan favorite of the 3 fully evolved starters. I love Blaziken. Grass types are almost always the least favorite starters among the community, so I'm used to it. But Charizard was already one step ahead of Venusaur and Blastoise, considering it was on the cover of Pokemon Red. People chose the games based on the covers. In Japan, of course people would choose a fire-breathing dragon over a less attractive plant monster, and outside of Japan, we associate dragons with epic adventures and not so much with turtles. Although I wonder if any kids actually cared when they found out Charizard wasn't an actual dragon type. But so far, these reasons for hating and loving Charizard or any other starter are all superficial. They have nothing to do with Charizard itself, its design, battle prowess, or concept. None of these are legitimate reasons to seriously hate something in my opinion, although if this was a debate, the case isn't so strong yet. But we'll get to that. The reason that ultimately contributed to the most amount of Charizard hatred is its overexposure. Other than Pikachu, which is the franchise's mascot after all, Charizard is the Pokemon with the most exposure over the last 20 plus years. In the anime, he was Ash's ace, much like how Greninja was Ash's #1 Pokemon in Kalos. For a majority of its appearances, Charizard was actually super disobedient. His personality sucked for a while, and I would totally understand if that was the reason you hated Charizard, but it's not a major reason. Its popularity has led it to appear in games outside of the franchise, like Super Smash Bros. And side games with limited rosters like Pokken. These extra appearances irk fans a whole lot, because the Pokemon Company ultimately lets Charizard overshadow any other Pokemon, especially the other great Pokemon that fans believe need as much attention. To many fans, it's not fair that Charizard always takes up limited spots of attention by default. Charizard always gets to be in various forms of media, pushing out other fan favorites. A Pokemon that gets the same amount of hate for the exact same reason is Lucario. I love this Pokemon, but it's constantly promoted when other Pokemon who fans think are more deserving of glory never get the spotlight. But I totally understand from a marketing standpoint that Charizard and Lucario are fan favorites, regardless of whether or not a minority of fans don't think they're perfect Pokemon. They sell because people want to see Pokemon like Charizard. You can't blame a company for doing what people like. I'm not saying all people like it, but Charizard is the most popular Pokemon. Pikachu is the franchise's mascot, and a really good one at that. You can't blame the Pokemon Company for slapping Pikachu on everything, because it represents all Pokemon. But even though I can't blame the Pokemon Company for advertising popular Pokemon, like Charizard, the way they portray them can be scrutinized. The emphasis on Pokemon like Pikachu and Charizard, especially when it comes to battling, is misleading. Novice fans tend to believe that these popular Pokemon are way better than they actually are. If I were to ask a child back during Pokemania what the strongest Pokemon is, there's a huge chance the the kid would say Charizard. Even worse, they may say Pikachu. Charizard is strong. Starter Pokemon are made to be more useful in the main game than most other Pokemon, but in the competitive scene, Pokemon like Charizard are never used. Not to mention Stealth Rock, am I right? Yeah, this Pokemon is definitely overrated when it comes to its battle prowess, and a knowledgeable fan could get tired of hearing people acknowledging Charizard when there are so many cool Pokemon to use in battle, like Pelipper. A few players have had negative experiences with Charizard fanboys way before their hatred for Charizard set in. Just like anything popular within any franchise, there are extremists who are super hostile to people who are somewhat critical of what they like. Even people who like Charizard, like me, prefer other Pokemon that may even be similar to Charizard, but are met with hate, primarily during childhood. But what about adulthood? A lot of people who hate Charizard actually pinpoint their turn for the worst once they became older. As these fans continued playing Pokemon and amassing a vast knowledge of pocket monsters, their taste grew beyond the first generation. But when Pokemon is brought up at some kind of gathering like an ice cream social or whatever the young adults do nowadays, fans who dropped out of the Pokemon scene after Gens 1 or 2 would usually cite Charizard as the best Pokemon. Conversations would usually go like this. Hey, look at my ice cream, it resembles that Pokemon, Onix, yeah. Remember Pokemon? Yeah, I actually still play it. I used a Steelix in my recent playthrough of it. What's a Steelix? Man, I could never play past Pokemon Red. There are just so many Pokemon to remember. The designs kinda went downhill, didn't they? Charizard was the best though, probably the strongest Pokemon. So some people just associate these nostalgia-blind fans with Charizard. It's simply one of the most popular Pokemon among people who used to play Pokemon, so it represents Gen 1ers' stubbornness and inability to validate the other 6 generations. And to be clear, a Gen 1er isn't a person who loves Gen 1, but rather a person who doesn't see any value in generations past the first one. And Game Freak knows that these key Gen 1 Pokemon could help bring retired fans back into the franchise, and they're completely right and justified in trying to implement Gen 1 Pokemon in newer games, so former fans can eventually see the joy of newer Pokemon. After all, fans who are here since Generation 1 like Charizard, former fans like Charizard, and even kids who are just entering the fandom and don't know of any toxicity surrounding the Pokemon love Charizard too. It's objectively popular. The problem some fans have is that Game Freak usually features the same popular Pokemon at the expense of more appropriate Pokemon. The final straw seemed to be in Generation 6, in which the Kanto starters received Mega Evolutions. It was super cool, but then Charizard X was revealed. 2 Charizards. Mewtwo got the same treatment, and to some fans, it didn't seem like these Pokemon got special treatment because they were popular among actual fans, but rather that Game Freak was trying to attract former fans back into the franchise. From my perspective, if any Pokemon were to get 2 Mega Evolutions, it would be Charizard and Mewtwo, especially since I do love Mega Charizard X. It's beautiful, but by then the bridge was burned. Charizard was officially the enemy to a group of fans. It was even worse for them now that people were actively using Mega Charizard in competitive battles. Charizard haters were being defeated by their least favorite Pokemon. That's pretty brutal. But while I've justified the reasons people hate Charizard, I have yet to give any direct reasons for hating this Pokemon. All of these criticisms have nothing to do with the Pokemon itself, but rather about how toxic fans of anything popular tend to be, and how the company keeps on contributing to this hatred. So what are genuine criticisms of the Pokemon itself? Pretend like Charizard didn't have fans, and the Pokemon company never put Charizard on mugs even. What are the reasons one would hate Charizard? Well, some fans dislike how it isn't actually a dragon type, although there are many various reasons that it shouldn't be a dragon type, like how imbalanced Charizard would be against the other starters, and how dragon types would be less valuable if they were available early on in the games. But keep in mind, everybody judges Pokemon completely differently. We all have different traits that we look for and value in a Pokemon. For example, before Gen 6, a person who only judges Pokemon on how useful they are in a competitive setting would automatically dislike Charizard because its typing isn't very defensive. If you were to judge it based on design, we could definitely disagree on whether or not Charizard is a well-designed Pokemon. Fans who are critical of Charizard's design cite how its belly is awkwardly round and its arms are puny, making it less imposing as a dragon. Fans think that other dragons in Pokemon look much better, and of course, there may be better fire-type starters. The fact that it's designed to look like a relatively generic dragon makes it less original than Blastoise and Venusaur, whose concepts have never been produced outside of Pokemon. Charizard could be a dragon in any other franchise. Some people would go as far as to say that it's ugly, and that's a little too subjective to really justify. I mean, I know that Pokemon I think are gorgeous and were made to look amazing, like Milotic and Absol, are deemed ugly by some fans. But ultimately, the main answer is that it's a plump, generic, non-dragon dragon that is weak to rocks and needs less attention. Then again, Mega Charizard X fixes all of these problems, but that makes Charizard haters even more angry, because Charizard is the only Pokemon that gets to fix its problems twice. Why does this Pokemon deserve this, and not my cherished Simisear? Okay, I couldn't even keep a straight face while saying that. Simisear sucks. But in the end, Charizard is clearly appealing to most people and was designed to be popular by professional artists we respect. It obviously doesn't mean you need to like it. I personally don't care, it's not like one of my favorite Pokemon or anything. But apart from the last few reasons we mentioned, I personally don't see any reason to outright despise Charizard, outside of any personal experiences. I have a personal philosophy to not let other people destroy my love for something, just because it is popular and has an annoying fanbase. I couldn't care less if you loved or hated Charizard, but I do dislike it when people give me reasons that they dislike a Pokemon that have nothing to do with the Pokemon itself. I totally understand them, especially after making this video, but just know that when it comes to anything popular, the people who go overboard with love or hatred are just a minority. Only 1% of fans would get angry if you said you hate him, and only another 1% would get angry if you said you love him. That's why I never associate fiction with its fans, cause the vocal minorities give us false perceptions, and that's a lesson you can carry with you to all aspects of life. But of course, tell me if there are any overrated Pokemon that you'd like me to cover in a video, and vice versa. Which Pokemon would you say deserve more appreciation and some time in the spotlight? Cause that would be an interesting topic to discuss. But if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. Check the description for the music I used, cool t-shirts I made, a link to my Patreon which you could get rewards for helping me out with, and my Twitter and Facebook which are essential to follow. I'll see you guys very soon.